He woke up choking on smoke and mud, dangling upside down in his seatbelt while the shattered cockpit of his shuttle burned around him. His first thought was not that he might die, not that alien slavers were closing in, but that his favorite leather jacket now smelled like roasted lizard. Somewhere between the cracked windshield and the sparks hissing off exposed wires, he laughed out loud, the kind of laugh a man makes when he realizes the universe is cruel and absurd all at once. Then the jungle answered back with a roar, deep and guttural, like the planet itself was welcoming him to his funeral. The harness finally snapped, dropping him headfirst into a puddle of black muck. He staggered to his feet, coughing, brushing slimy vines off his shoulders. Around him, the alien jungle pulsed with life. Trees the width of skyscraper columns leaned over him, their canopies blotting out the weak sunlight. Things hissed and chirped in the shadows, unseen eyes glimmered between twisted roots. He swore the vines were moving, curling closer to his boots with every breath. He wanted to believe that was paranoia, but the bite of something sharp and wet on his ankle suggested otherwise. He grabbed a piece of bent metal from the shuttle wreckage and hacked at the vine until it squealed and slithered back into the undergrowth. Blood oozed from his ankle, hot and stinging. He had no time to bandage it. Above the tree-line, engines roared. Slaver dropships. He could almost hear them laughing already, picturing him stumbling through the jungle, bleeding and broken, like a rabbit for the chase. The hunt was entertainment for them. He had seen it before on other colonies, slavers betting bottles of alien whiskey on how long a man would last before collapsing. He pictured the audience now, their bulbous eyes blinking with excitement, claws clacking as they placed wagers. He clenched his fists, tasting dirt and smoke on his tongue. They would not get that satisfaction from him. If they wanted a show, then he would give them one they would never forget. He limped away from the wreck, pushing deeper into the foliage. The air grew thicker, humid enough to choke. Branches clawed at his face, beetles the size of fists clattered off his shoulders. He tried to laugh again, to keep his sanity. The sound came out like a bark. "Welcome to paradise," he muttered, ducking under a fallen trunk as bright red fungus hissed with every step he took. By the time the engines overhead cut off, silence pressed down on him like a weight. He dropped into a crouch, hiding beneath a curtain of broad leaves. Through the gaps he saw them descend. 4 figures armored in black plates, weapons strapped to their spindly backs. They moved with casual arrogance, scanning the ground with devices that clicked and whirred. One of them spoke in a guttural language, and the others laughed. Even without understanding the words, he knew mockery when he heard it. He pressed his palm into the mud, forcing himself to breathe slowly. He remembered a saying from an old war sergeant: "When you cannot outrun the wolves, become the bear." He had no ship, no weapons, no backup. What he had was the jungle, and if he played it right, the jungle would eat them alive. Moving in silence, he circled wide, slipping through vines and weaving around roots. Every snap of a twig made his pulse hammer harder. He reached the far side of the clearing, close enough to smell the alien's armor oil, sharp and metallic. He watched one kneel to examine a footprint, its head tilting with almost childlike curiosity. That was when the idea struck him. The shuttle wreck was littered with cable lines and torn harness straps. He slid back, gathered what he could, and set to work with shaking hands. Vines became rope, a broken strut became a lever, and within minutes he had shaped a crude but promising snare. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with soot, but he grinned despite himself. Somewhere in his mind, he heard the sergeant's voice again, growling approval. The first alien wandered away from the others, its scanner chirping as it traced a trail through the trees. It stepped across a patch of ferns, and the ground gave way. A vine tightened around its ankle, yanking it upward with savage force. The alien shrieked, dangling from the canopy, its weapon clattering to the dirt. The others spun around, snarling in their language. He watched them scramble, their arrogance cracking, as their comrade flailed upside down like a grotesque piece of meat hung for drying. He almost laughed but bit it back, holding still as they fired blindly into the branches. Bolts of plasma sizzled through the air, scorching bark, setting leaves ablaze. Birds the size of wolves erupted from the canopy, screeching. While chaos raged, he slipped further into the jungle. His heart pounded with savage satisfaction. For the first time since the crash, he felt alive. They thought he was prey, but prey did not laugh in the middle of a burning jungle. Prey did not hang their hunters from the trees. He found a ridge overlooking the clearing and crouched low. The trapped alien was still hanging, twisting helplessly, its shrieks echoing through the canopy. The others were shouting into comms, gesturing wildly. He saw one raise its rifle and level it at the dangling figure. The shot ended the screams in a flash of blue fire. The jungle fell silent again, save for the crackle of burning leaves. He whispered to himself, voice shaking with equal parts terror and exhilaration. One down. Then, louder with a grim smile. Let the game begin. The jungle seemed to answer, branches swaying, shadows deepening. Somewhere far off, something howled, not in warning but in approval. He tightened his grip on the broken strut in his hand, his makeshift weapon, and vanished once more into the dark. The jungle dripped with heat as the sun crawled across the canopy, light cutting through gaps in shifting green. He moved like a shadow through the undergrowth, every sense raw and sharp. His ankle ached where the vine creature had bitten him, his stomach growled with hollow protests, and sweat soaked his shirt until it clung like a second skin. Yet he grinned despite it all. Somewhere behind him, 3 alien slavers argued in their chittering language, hunting devices clicking and whirring, frustrated by the mess he had made of their easy sport. The first of their pack still hung in the trees, a blackened husk after being put down by his own allies. One less predator, and the game had shifted. The trick was to think like them but act like something else entirely. They hunted for fun, for a spectacle. He hunted because it was the only thing standing between him and becoming a trophy. He dragged twisted metal from the shuttle wreck deeper into the forest, searching for branches, vines, and stone. Each piece became a weapon in his hands, crude but deadly. A jagged panel of plating turned into a spear tip lashed to a branch. A cable loop knotted with vines formed a snare. Even an old fuel cell casing, dented but intact, became a trap if placed where it might detonate under pressure. As he worked, he muttered to himself, part sarcasm, part mantra to keep fear at bay. Congratulations, genius! Stranded on a planet with toothy trees, plasma-happy kidnappers, and your survival kit is duct tape and bad jokes. MacGyver would be proud, if MacGyver enjoyed screaming every time something crawled into his boots. He shook his leg violently, sending a centipede the size of his forearm tumbling back into the ferns. By nightfall, his traps lay scattered in a rough circle, each hidden among roots or dangling overhead. He crouched in the crook of a massive tree, watching the fireflies gather like floating embers, listening to the forest breathe. He did not have to wait long. The sound of alien boots crunched against foliage, low growls echoing as the slavers advanced. They had split into pairs now, cautious, their laughter gone. He watched 2 move into the ring of his traps, scanners sweeping. One knelt to examine the ground. Its claws tapped on a root. A split second later, the vine snare snapped tight, pulling the alien upward in a violent arc. Its scream shredded the silence. The second one reacted fast, firing wildly at the canopy. Both seared past his hiding place, one close enough to singe the bark. He gritted his teeth, waiting, heart pounding so hard he thought they would hear it. Then the jungle itself seemed to intervene. A low vibration shook the ground, followed by a thunderous crack. Something massive stirred in the darkness. The slaver on the ground froze, weapon raised, eyes darting. Out of the shadows, a creature emerged, 6 legs, armored hide, eyes glowing like molten rock. It towered above them, antennae twitching as it caught the scent of blood and panic. The alien in the snare thrashed uselessly, and the beast lunged, jaws snapping. The predator became prey in an instant. He almost laughed at the irony but kept still as the jungle monster dragged the dangling slaver away. The other fired bolt after bolt into its armored hide, but the beast shrugged them off. In seconds, both hunter and victim vanished into the dark, leaving only silence and the reek of burnt plasma. He breathed again, though his chest still ached. 2 down. But he knew better than to think luck would keep working in his favor. The remaining hunters would adapt, would grow more cautious and more cruel. And their arrogance, cracked as it was, could turn into something worse: desperation. Desperate slavers were unpredictable, and unpredictability in this jungle meant death. As the night wore on, he prowled the edges of his trap ring, checking what remained. Some snares were tripped by wild animals, their carcasses half-eaten by scavengers. Others lay waiting, tension ready to snap. He found himself chuckling softly, shaking his head. Imagine explaining this to a bartender back home. "What did you do this week?" "Oh, nothing much, just hung some intergalactic traffickers from trees while carnivorous snails tried to chew my boots." His laughter was cut short by the unmistakable whine of alien tech. A drone buzzed through the trees, lights sweeping the jungle floor. He ducked low, cursing silently. They had deployed trackers now, tiny machines with sensors sharp enough to pick heat signatures out of the foliage. He rolled into a ditch, covering himself with mud until only his eyes peeked through. The drone hovered above, paused, then zipped away with a mechanical chirp. When he climbed out, dripping with filth, he realized his ankle wound had worsened. The mud had caked over it, but infection was creeping in, sending red streaks along his skin. His strength waned with each step. He leaned against a tree, breathing raggedly, eyes darting. If he collapsed now, the game would end in laughter for the slavers. He refused to give them that ending. He forced himself forward, whispering curses at his own weakness. The jungle closed in around him, suffocating and alive. Strange calls echoed in the distance, and he wondered how many of them were animals and how many were mimicked by the hunters. He pressed on, refusing to rest, until a glow caught his eye ahead. Through the trees, a fire burned bright, and he crept closer, silent as the shadows. In a clearing, the slavers had camped. Their ship loomed above, sleek and predatory, lights blinking as it powered a perimeter shield. He saw 3 of them gathered around the fire, tossing charred meat into their mouths. Their voices rose in guttural conversation, punctuated by cruel laughter. He could not understand the words, but the tone was enough. They spoke of him like an animal, a prize yet to be claimed. His vision blurred for a moment, fever from the wound tugging at him, but he steadied himself. He would not be their amusement. He would not die crawling. If the jungle was willing, tomorrow night the camp itself would become his hunting ground. And when the last of them dangled from the trees, he would be there to watch the light fade from their mocking eyes. He retreated into the darkness, clutching his makeshift spear, grinning through exhaustion and pain. The game had changed, and the slavers did not even know it yet. They thought him a quarry running from death. But he was no quarry. He was the shadow waiting in the branches, the laugh in the dark, the noose of vines tightening around their necks. And before the jungle was done with them, they would all learn that the prey had teeth. The morning air was thick with steam rising off the jungle floor, as if the entire forest was breathing hot breath onto his neck. He had not slept, not really. Every sound in the dark had kept him awake, every rustle of leaves had felt like claws about to close around his throat. By the time the pale light bled through the canopy, his eyes burned and his muscles ached, but he pushed himself onward. The fever from his ankle wound clawed at his mind, but it was not fever that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was the sound of voices. Not the guttural chatter of the slavers, but something softer, desperate, muffled by distance. He slipped forward, moving through vines and ferns until the jungle opened into a hidden clearing. There, half buried beneath roots and overgrowth, stood cages. Not crude pits or rope nets, but reinforced metal cells clearly dragged from slaver ships and anchored into the earth. Inside, he saw shapes. Beings of different species, gaunt from hunger, some barely able to lift their heads. One figure pressed thin fingers through the bars, eyes wide with terror when they spotted him. For a moment he thought of turning back. More mouths meant more problems. But the sight of those cages twisted his gut. He had seen cages before, in colonies the slavers raided. He had seen men and women herded like cattle, stripped of dignity, reduced to property. The memory burned hot enough to burn away hesitation. He crept closer, knife of sharpened metal in his hand. The prisoners stirred, whispers rising in a dozen accents. Most were too weak to speak loudly, but one near the front hissed something in a sharp voice. The words were alien, but the tone was unmistakable. Sarcasm. The figure stepped into the light, revealing itself as a squat amphibian creature with mottled blue skin and bulbous yellow eyes that seemed far too expressive. The alien jabbed a webbed finger at him and croaked out a phrase. When no recognition crossed his face, the creature rolled its eyes in exaggerated annoyance. Then, in surprisingly broken human tongue, it said, "About time. You look worse than caged food." He blinked, stunned by both the voice and the absurdity of the comment. Here he was, covered in mud and blood, fever burning through him, and the first thing he heard was an insult. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he shook his head and set to work on the cage lock. The amphibian watched him, muttering in its own tongue, occasionally slipping into badly pronounced human words. "Slow, clumsy, maybe we die in here first." He shot the creature a glare, and the alien raised its webbed hands in mock surrender. "Just saying." The lock gave with a groan, and the door swung open. The prisoners spilled out, some crawling, others dragging each other along. The amphibian strutted forward as if it had orchestrated the entire rescue. It gave him a lopsided grin. "Hero. Ha! You are crazy. You will die. But maybe we die slower with you." He wanted to tell it to shut up, but there was no time. The sound of engines whispered overhead. Slaver patrol. He cursed under his breath and motioned the group toward the jungle. They stumbled after him, weak legs tripping on roots, groans filling the air. He tried to herd them silently, but stealth was impossible with so many. The amphibian kept close to his side, muttering complaints about mud, about bugs, about his choice of direction. The sarcasm, strangely, gave him focus. It kept his mind from drifting too far into fever and fatigue. They made it less than a mile before the ambush came. Plasma fire split the air, scorching the trunks around them. One prisoner fell instantly, a smoking hole through its chest. The other screamed. He shoved them down into the ferns and dove behind a log, teeth gritted. The slavers had tracked the noise, of course they had. He saw two of them pushing through the trees, weapons raised. The amphibian ducked behind him, shrieking in a way that was half fear, half insult. "Good plan, hero! Led us straight into death!" He hurled a stone toward one of his traps, a line strung between roots. The slaver stepped onto it, and a spiked branch whipped upward, catching it under the chin and hurling it backward with a gurgle. The other spun, firing wildly. He rushed it with a snarl, ramming his makeshift spear into the soft joint under its arm. The alien screamed, claws flailing, before collapsing in the muck. Silence crashed down again, broken only by the gasps of the freed prisoners. He stood over the bodies, chest heaving. The amphibian peeked out from behind the log, eyes wide. Then, to his shock, it clapped its webbed hands together. "Not bad, human. Not bad. Maybe you live longer than I thought. Still ugly, though." The sarcasm sparked a short, mad laugh from his throat. He did not know if it was the fever or the absurdity of having a blue amphibian critic as his new ally, but it felt good to laugh. The laughter died quickly as he saw the other prisoners. They were terrified, hungry, and now one fewer than before. The jungle felt heavier with each second. The slavers would not let this stand. They would know the cages were empty. They would come in force. He led the group deeper into the jungle, finding a hollow beneath a cluster of twisted roots where they could hide for a while. He gave them what little water he had, rationing drops carefully. The amphibian slumped beside him, still muttering, but quieter now. In the dim light of the hollow, he saw something behind the sarcasm in those yellow eyes. Fear, yes, but also intelligence, calculation. The creature was not just mocking him to be cruel. It was testing him, seeing if he was strong enough to follow. The night came alive with fire. Not theirs, but the slavers. A glow spread across the canopy, smoke curling into the sky. The air thickened with the smell of burning leaves. He crept out of the hollow, and saw the horizon red with flame. The slavers were torching the jungle, flushing them out like rats. Panic swept through the prisoners as sparks rained down, flames crackling closer. He knew staying hidden meant being cooked alive. They had to move, and fast. With no time for subtlety, he gathered the group and pushed them through the smoke-choked undergrowth. Ash stung his eyes, and he pressed against his back as the fire roared closer. A slaver's ship loomed above, spotlights cutting through the haze. He saw figures moving in the firelight, slavers shouting, weapons raised. But fire was as much a danger to them as to him. With a grin born of madness, he hurled a broken fuel cell into the blaze. The explosion ripped through the clearing, flames leaping higher, smoke choking the sky. The slaver's ship dipped violently, alarms blaring, before crashing into the treetops in a blossom of fire. The jungle roared back at them with flame and fury. He staggered through the smoke, dragging one prisoner after another, coughing until his lungs felt like fire. The amphibian stumbled beside him, still muttering, still alive. When at last they collapsed in the charred skeleton of a grove, the prisoners gasped in exhaustion, but they were alive. He lay on his back, chest heaving, watching sparks drift upward into the night sky. The jungle had burned, the slavers had lost another ship, and he had gained allies, however fragile. He turned his head toward the amphibian, who gave him a crooked grin. "You are insane! But maybe insanity keeps us alive." For the first time since the crash, he did not feel completely alone. The jungle was quieter after the fire, though the silence was uneasy, broken now and then by the groan of collapsing trees and the hiss of smoldering ash. He had managed to lead the freed prisoners into a deeper section of the forest, far enough from the burned clearing that the glow of flames was no longer visible. The survivors huddled beneath the gnarled roots of a fallen giant, whispering nervously, eyes darting at every sound. He sat apart from them, sharpening a shard of metal against a stone, his fever rising and his mind drifting between exhaustion and clarity. The amphibian creature perched nearby, still wearing that crooked grin, as if waiting for the moment to strike with another sarcastic jab. But tonight his focus was on something else entirely. He had noticed the drones circling more often, buzzing overhead like metallic insects. They were the slavers' eyes, sweeping the jungle, guiding the hunters toward him and his ragged group. If he kept reacting, they would eventually box him in. The only way forward was to take control of the game. He lay on his back, staring at the glowing dots of the drones through gaps in the canopy, and an idea formed, dangerous and reckless but promising. If he could capture one of the drones and redirect its signal, he could turn their own technology against them. At dawn, when the others still dozed, he climbed higher into the canopy than ever before. The vines were slick with dew, branches swayed beneath his weight, and insects scattered in his path. He positioned himself where the drones passed most often, pressing his body flat against a branch, his spear balanced across his knees. When the first one zipped past, he lunged, striking with precision. The spear cracked into its metal casing, sending it tumbling. He caught it in both arms as it sputtered and whirred, sparks crackling. It thrashed like a living thing, its rotors spinning wildly, but he jammed the spear into its core until it fell still, lights flickering. Back on the ground, he worked feverishly with trembling hands. The amphibian watched, occasionally snorting at his clumsy attempts, until finally the creature squatted beside him, webbed fingers surprisingly nimble. Without a word, it began reconfiguring wires, pressing nodes, twisting circuits. He stared, then let out a dry laugh. "You could have mentioned you knew how to do this." The alien shot him a look that said more than words. Of course it knew. Did he expect to be the only clever one on this planet? By the time the sun was high, the drone buzzed back to life. Its light blinked in steady rhythm, but instead of transmitting to the hunters, it looped false signals, projecting heat signatures in the opposite direction. Within an hour, the slavers were moving away, chasing ghosts through the trees. The prisoners looked at him with new hope in their tired eyes, and for a brief moment he felt something like triumph. That feeling did not last. By nightfall, one of the slavers stumbled upon their trail anyway, a hulking brute with jagged armor and a cruel smile visible even in the dark. The creature carried a blade longer than his arm, and it moved with terrifying speed. He fought it in the swampy ground of the lowlands, mud sucking at his boots, mosquitoes biting at his skin. The slavers slashed with deadly precision, every swing humming with energy that sliced through branches like butter. He countered with his spear and fists, ducking, rolling, letting the swamp swallow him until he came up gasping and flinging mud into its face. The battle was savage, each strike rattling his bones. At one point the blade came within an inch of splitting his chest, but he twisted, catching the weapon with his improvised spear, the impact shattering the shaft. He lunged in desperation, grabbing the alien by its armor plates, and they crashed together into the muck. They grappled, rolling, striking, each trying to force the other beneath the surface. At last he found his chance. He looped a vine around its throat, bracing his weight with all the strength left in him. The slaver thrashed, clawing, eyes bulging as the jungle itself seemed to strangle it. When the body finally went limp, he left it dangling from a tree, the swamp dripping from its armor. He staggered back to the others, covered in mud and blood, trembling with exhaustion but alive. The prisoners looked at him as if he were more than human, and he hated that look because it carried expectations he was not sure he could meet. He was no savior, just a man too stubborn to die. The tension worsened the next day when they discovered supplies missing. A small cache of food he had scavenged was gone, and one of the prisoners refused to meet his gaze. It did not take long to uncover the truth. The amphibian stepped forward, webbed finger pointing at the guilty one with theatrical flair. The thief stammered excuses, but the damage was done. In their fear and hunger, they were turning on each other. He knew slavers thrived on division. Fear fractured groups faster than plasma fire. He gave the food back to the others, forcing calm into his voice, but inside he burned with frustration. Every betrayal was another wound in his fragile plan. They could not survive if they did not trust him, and yet trust was already bleeding away. The real blow came that night. The amphibian, who had stayed at his side through every skirmish, was gone when he woke. Its absence gnawed at him more than the missing food. At first he thought it had been taken by the slavers, but then he found footprints leading away, straight toward the enemy's camp. The betrayal felt like a knife between his ribs. The sarcasm, the crooked grins, all of it had been a mask. He had trusted the creature, and it had sold him out. The jungle pressed close, the cries of unseen beasts echoing through the darkness. He sat alone by the dying embers of a fire, staring at the place where the amphibian had once sat. Around him, the freed prisoners slept fitfully, unaware of the treachery unfolding. He clenched his fists, anger boiling hotter than fever. The game was shifting again. The hunters were still out there, the drones still circling, the jungle still watching. And now, betrayal stalked him too. But he would not fold. He swore silently into the night, his voice a growl meant only for the trees. The slavers thought they had broken him, the jungle thought it could devour him, and even betrayal thought it had crushed his will. They were wrong. Tomorrow he would show them all. Tomorrow he would remind them whose game this truly was. The night closed in heavy and wet, the jungle steaming with the aftermath of rain. He crouched on a ridge overlooking a ravine, his breath slow, his body silent, his mind colder than it had ever been. The betrayal by the amphibian sat like a stone in his gut, but anger had burned away the sting, leaving only purpose. If the alien thought handing him over would buy freedom, it had underestimated both him and the jungle. Trust was gone now, stripped clean like bark peeled from a tree. All that remained was the hunt. He was no longer running. He was the ghost in the branches, the shadow behind every sound. The slavers moved below, cautious now, no longer laughing, no longer betting bottles of liquor on how quickly he would die. They had seen too many of their comrades strung from the trees or dragged screaming into the undergrowth by beasts they could not control. Their arrogance had soured into unease. Even from above he could see it in their posture, shoulders hunched, weapons clutched tighter. They whispered into their calms, scanning constantly, their faces twitching at every rustle of leaves. They were the ones being stalked, and deep down they knew it. He let them pass beneath him, counting their number. 3 remained in this group, the strongest and most experienced, their armor scarred and dented from battles fought on 100 worlds. These were not the grunts who had swaggered through the jungle before. These were killers. Yet killers bled like anyone else. He dropped down silently, feet sinking into the mud, and moved parallel to them, a patient shadow. He had stripped away everything that slowed him. No more heavy packs, no more scraps of wreckage. Just a spear, a knife, and the jungle itself. The first trap was simple, a tripwire of vines strung low across the path, hidden beneath leaves. He watched from a distance as one of them triggered it, stumbling forward into a pit lined with sharpened branches. The scream cut through the jungle, short and wet, then silence. The other two whirled, weapons raised, firing bursts of plasma into the shadows. Birds exploded from the canopy, shrieking. He grinned, teeth flashing in the dark. One down. Two left. The survivors pressed tighter together, backs nearly touching as they crept forward. They muttered in low tones, their voices tight with strain. He circled wide, moving faster now, his bare feet silent in the muck. He wanted them to feel it. He wanted them to know the prey they thought they hunted had become something worse. Every time they glanced into the trees, he was already gone, leaving nothing but the sway of branches. The second fell in a burst of violence. He dropped from above, landing on its shoulders, driving his knife into the gap between plates at the neck. The alien thrashed, claws tearing at his arms, but he hung on, forcing the blade deeper until hot blood gushed across his hands. The other turned, firing wildly, but by then he was gone, rolling into the undergrowth as the body collapsed with a thud. The survivor screamed in rage, a sound less of fury than of fear. Hours passed, the jungle stretching longer with each step. The last slaver remained, more careful than the others, scanning constantly, moving with deliberate patience. He was larger, more heavily armored, and his weapon gleamed with modifications, deadlier than anything the others had carried. This one was the leader, the true predator of the group. And now he was alone. He stalked him for miles, never rushing, always letting the jungle play its part. At one point, the leader stopped in a grove where bodies hung from branches. Slavers he had already killed dangled above, swinging in the breeze, grotesque trophies of his war. The leader froze, staring up at them. His breathing quickened, shoulders rising and falling in visible panic. The human stepped closer, watching from the shadows, whispering just loud enough to be carried by the wind. "Welcome to my gallery." The leader spun, weapon snapping toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Only shadows. Only vines that looked too much like ropes in the gloom. He laughed softly to himself, a humorless sound, then slipped away again. The standoff finally came in the ruins of an ancient structure half swallowed by roots and moss. Stones carved with symbols long forgotten loomed around them, broken pillars leaning like drunks in the dark. The leader waited there, standing in the open, weapon glowing with deadly promise. He knew he was being hunted and had chosen his ground. The human stepped into the clearing slowly, mud-streaked, shirt torn, fever burning in his veins, but his eyes sharp. The leader barked something in its guttural language, voice rising with challenge. He said nothing in reply. Words were useless now. The slaver raised his weapon, and the fight began. Plasma bolts scorched the ruins as he dove behind a pillar, shards of stone raining down. He moved fast, weaving between cover, forcing the alien to waste energy, to chase shadows. Each bolt that missed seared another mark into the ancient stone, firelight flashing in the gloom. He closed the distance when the slaver paused to adjust its rifle. Charging forward, he hurled his spear with every ounce of strength left in him. The point struck the alien's chest, embedding deep, but the armor held enough to keep it alive. Roaring, it ripped the spear free and swung its massive blade. The clash was brutal. He dodged by inches, feeling the heat of the blade slice past his face. He countered with his knife, slashing at exposed joints, ducking under swings, rolling in the dirt. The duel raged until both were covered in blood, sweat, and mud, slipping across the ruins like beasts. Finally, he fainted low, then surged upward, wrapping a vine around the slaver's neck. He twisted, bracing his weight against a fallen stone. The alien thrashed, striking him again and again, but he held fast, the vine cutting deeper with every pull. The leader's roars turned to gurgles, then to silence. When the body finally sagged, he let it fall, watching it slump across the broken ruins. He stood over the corpse, chest heaving, body trembling with exhaustion. The jungle around him was silent, as if even the beasts were waiting to see if he would rise again. Slowly he straightened, wiping blood from his face, staring into the shadows. He was alone now, but not empty. He had become the hunter they feared, the specter in the trees. The bodies of the slavers hung across the jungle like grim warnings. They had come for sport, for amusement, but they had given him something else entirely. Purpose. He whispered into the dark, voice raw but steady. You wanted a hunt. Now you are the trophies. The jungle answered with the groan of trees, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the silence of predators giving ground. The ruins stank of blood and smoke, and the jungle pressed in as if curious about who had survived the clash. He leaned against a broken stone wall, body shaking from exhaustion, fever burning his thoughts into fragments. The leader's corpse lay twisted at his feet, its weapons still clutched in clawed hands. He forced himself to pry it free, though his arms trembled under the weight. The alien blade was slick with his own blood where it had grazed him, but it felt like victory in his grip. For the first time since the crash, he allowed himself to breathe without the immediate fear of a bolt tearing through his chest. The hunt was over. Or so he thought. From the shadows of the ruins came a sound that froze him. Not the growl of a beast, not the hum of a drone, but the unmistakable squelching gait of webbed feet. He turned slowly, gripping the blade tight, his chest tight with rage. The amphibian stood there, yellow eyes wide, its crooked grin replaced with something strange. Regret. It shuffled closer, arms raised, as though the sight of it would not ignite fury in his veins. He had imagined this moment a dozen times since finding its tracks leading to the enemy, each ending with his knife buried in its throat. Yet now the creature looked smaller, less mocking, almost broken. You still live, it croaked in halting human words. I thought, maybe you would not. I was wrong. Its voice wavered. They promised me freedom, promised me food, safety. I believed. But they lied. They always lie. He spat into the dirt, the motion sharp and bitter. And you sold me out for that. The amphibian's head lowered. Yes. I did. And I regret. Its webbed fingers trembled as it gestured to the blade in his hand. Kill me now if you want. But let me do one thing first. Let me make it right. His first instinct was to strike, to silence the treacherous voice forever. But the jungle had taught him patience, and something in those eyes told him this was no trick. The creature stepped forward, pointing toward the ruins beyond. There are more. Not hunters. Slaves. Hidden camps. If they find you, they will keep coming. You kill leader, yes. But they always send more. Unless you end them here. Unless you turn their game into cage. He hesitated, his breath ragged, then lowered the blade slightly. The fury did not fade, but it shifted, hardening into focus. If the amphibian was lying, it would die quickly. If it was telling the truth, then perhaps betrayal could still serve him. Together they followed a winding path deeper into the ruins, the jungle reclaiming stone corridors with roots thick as his arms. The air grew cooler, damp, the sound of running water echoing ahead. At the heart of the ruins they found what the amphibian had promised. A makeshift camp, cages stacked like cargo, filled with beings from countless worlds. Starved, beaten, but alive. Slaver survivors guarded them, 3 in total, armed and wary. His grip tightened on the alien blade. He glanced at the amphibian, who gave a small nod. Without words, they moved. He circled wide, slipping into the shadows of collapsed walls. The amphibian crept the other way, surprisingly quiet despite its ungainly form. When one of the guards turned, distracted by a cough from a prisoner, he struck. The blade tore through armor and flesh, hot blood spraying across the stones. Chaos erupted instantly. The other 2 guards shouted, weapons firing into the ruins. The amphibian leapt from cover, its webbed hands gripping a fallen branch like a club, slamming it across the head of one slaver with surprising force. The last guard lunged at him, claws raking, but he met it head on, blade flashing in the dim light. They clashed in a brutal exchange, each strike ringing against stone, until at last he drove the blade upward under its chin. The alien's eyes rolled back as it collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the sobs of the prisoners. He stood there, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds, and realized the fight was truly finished. The camp was theirs. The slaves were free. Around him, beings of every shape and size looked at him with awe, as if he had been sent by some vengeful spirit. He wanted to tell them he was no spirit, no hero, just a stubborn fool who refused to die. But the words caught in his throat. The amphibian approached slowly, its grin tentative, uncertain. "I told you! I make it right!" For a moment, its eyes softened. Then a sharp crack split the air. A slaver, not as dead as they thought, staggered from the ground with a hidden pistol. The shot hit the amphibian square in the chest. It gasped, yellow eyes wide, then collapsed into his arms. Rage exploded inside him. He ripped the pistol from the dying slaver and drove the alien blade through its heart, pinning it to the stone floor. Then he knelt beside the amphibian. The creature coughed, blood bubbling from its mouth, but still tried to grin. "Ugly, but strong. I think maybe you are my friend." The words came out broken, fading, then silence. He closed the alien's eyes with his hand. For all its betrayal, for all its sarcasm, it had chosen in the end to stand beside him. The loss hurt more than he expected. He sat there a long while, listening to the jungle beyond the ruins, until the cries of the freed prisoners pulled him back. They needed him now. They needed a leader. He rose, gripping the alien blade, and cut open the cages one by one. Chains fell away, and frightened faces turned to hope. Among the debris of the slaver camp, he found a calm beacon, still active, its signal strong enough to reach orbit. With shaking hands, he tuned it, broadcasting a simple distress call on every frequency he knew. Help would come eventually. But until then, the jungle was theirs. When dawn broke, the sky blazed orange over the smoking canopy. He stood on a ridge, watching as the sun climbed. The prisoners gathered behind him. The jungle stretched endless in every direction, dangerous and alive, but for the first time it did not feel like a cage. It felt like victory. He glanced at the trees where slavers still hung in grotesque silence, trophies of the hunt. He spat into the dirt and muttered with a tired smile. "You wanted a hunt. You got one." Then he shouldered the alien blade, turned his back on the ruins, and began leading the survivors toward the rising sun, leaving behind a jungle littered with the ghosts of hunters who had thought him prey.